Yes, of course.
Okay.
Also, shall we bring the meeting to order, please? Shall we bring the meeting to order, please? Call asking for the roll call. Thank you.
Carlton,
Yes, here.
Osager, here. Angelis,
Here.
Walker,
Here.
Vasconcelos,
Here.
Westerberg,
Here.
Saylor,
Here.
Billets,
Here.
Legion.
Here.
Everybody's present. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Yeah, quite a little social going this morning, just, enjoying seeing everybody in person, of course, getting back into the routine. So welcome, everybody, to this month's May meeting of the Boise Airport Commission. Our first order of business is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any comments?
I read it.
Very good. Hearing none, ask for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Ms. Rebecca Hupp. You are
Good
up.
morning. It is fabulous to see everyone live and in person today. I'm going to just jump right into my director's report, and you can stop me if you have questions, or I can take questions at the end, whenever you prefer. Okay, my page down does not seem to be working. I just have to be a little bit more patient. So we have had some runway closures in the month of April, mostly just routine maintenance, working on some different things, but we have had quite a few. And you may have noticed when you came in, we have some new cranes up for the parking garage. That is continuing to move forward. The pedestrian bridges are in place, or the placement is in progress rather. The main stair tower is being placed for the concrete walls, and the office's insulation is being installed. So we are making good progress on that, as well as the employee garage. Both of those projects are moving forward. We are working on taxiway or taxi lane Sierra. As you may recall, that's the widening project for the new cargo facility. Basically what we're working on right now is the sub base. And then there's some utilities and stuff that are going in as part of that project. And that is scheduled to be completed in October. Oh, I just skipped right to the end there. That's all. No. Sorry. So also one of the things that we're working on is a sustainability project. It's called VALE, and that's the type of grant it is. It's a federal funding. It's the Voluntary Airport Low Emissions. And we're using it to install some ground equipment over on the west side. So that way aircraft don't have to idle. They can use these ground power units, and they're not actually burning fuel. That started on the 25th of April, and it's in process, and that'll be completed this summer. And masks are now optional in the airport effective April 18th. Passengers were all very excited about that, as were employees. So I think everybody knows that it went to, it's being appealed, but we will see what happens. But for this point in time, we are not wearing masks in the airport. You're welcome to if you would like to, but it's not required. Parking. This is our new favorite subject at the Boise Airport. And you may have noticed today that our parking lots were full. We've had multiple days of peak parking. Spring break was a peak parking. And then in April, we had 2 weekends in April that actually exceeded spring break parking. So even though we've added almost 700 spaces over the last few months by relocating employees, we're concerned that it might not be enough. So we'll be relocating those employees for summer over to Elder Street, which is very near the Applebee's. And then we'll go from there, but we're looking at other options for expanding parking and possibly offering valet. More to come. We're also in the planning stages for the Triennial Emergency Exercise. This is a requirement once every 3 years. And it's required by the FAA, but it's part of our emergency preparedness planning, and it's also part of our certification. Screen is not cooperating. You probably are aware we have 4 bomb sniffing dogs at the airport, 4 canines, and they go through recertification and evaluation. They all passed. And the examiner was very complimentary. I will mention that one of our dogs is retiring and we will be getting a replacement dog.
How many bombs
one
have
of
they
the-
found lately?
Thankfully none, Russ. We did have a suspicious package, probably it was maybe late fall, I want to say, where someone had left something on the curb and it was suspicious. It was a toolbox, and the way that it was positioned, we couldn't see it from the camera angle, and we did bring out the bomb sniffing dog. So even though we don't detect things, it's good that we have them, because it's also important for us to know that we don't have a bomb. They also are used for cargo and inspecting cargo.
Madam Chair, Councilman Bajan.
Yes, go ahead.
I was just super relieved, Rebecca, when you said that you found a suspicious package and called the dog last fall, that it wasn't my wife's purse, which sat on the curb at the airport for 3 hours before we noticed and went and retrieved it. So thank you for not calling it on us.
Yeah, I know it was a toolbox, unless your wife carries a toolbox, but it was a toolbox with all sorts of random wires and tools and clothing and aerosol cans. It was a little bizarre.
When you said they go to the cargo, they're just for bombs at the cargo, or do they sniff for drugs or anything like that?
No, they only sniff for bombs. When you work with canines, and I'm not a canine expert, although I do think that my dog is the best dog ever.
They work on one thing.
They only work on one thing, because when they alert, you don't want to have to guess, are they alerting for drugs or are they alerting because of it being a bomb? So they're very specialized. One of the other things that's happening behind the scenes that you probably would not be aware of is we are working on an environmental assessment, and this is part of the runway incursion mitigation plan. One of the recommendations was to relocate the threshold of one of the runways. We are holding an open house on June 7th, and it's for the public to learn more about the proposed runway safety improvement and provide input into the study. And we're going to use, the traditional methods: postcards, newspaper, emails, and through our social media and website.
Will that be here?
We are looking at potential locations. Our plan was initially to host it here at the airport. However, given our current parking dilemma, we're thinking it might be better to host it off-site near the airport, but not actually here. While we're talking about dogs, we'll talk about our Go Team Therapy dogs. We occasionally have them out to the airport. They'd like to come and do training here because it's a great environment. And of course, passengers and employees all love to see the therapy dogs. We added 16 new dogs and 18 new handlers. And we are thankful that winter is done. I think everyone's grateful to see spring, but we are especially grateful to be through the snow removal season. And we hosted an end of winter celebration to recognize our team, that when everyone says things like, oh, I hope it snows on Christmas. Yeah, these are the folks who have to actually work through that. So we do appreciate everything that they do because we try to predict the snow, but it's not an exact science. So a great shout out to that team. And I think there's a sense that passenger travel has returned. And the data corroborates that. When we saw a 7% increase in March compared to 2019, which we're comparing to 2019 because it was our busiest year on record. If you remember, March of 2020 is when the pandemic started. So we had a really strong start to March of 2020, but then passenger traffic dropped dramatically. So we're comparing it to 2019. I would note that we do not have the official numbers for April yet, but I was looking at the throughput through the checkpoint, and it looks like we're up about 6% again in April as well. So total passengers for the year were up 2%. Again, very strong. 2020 started out to be a very strong year for us in terms of travel. I will say that this is probably not what most airports are seeing. I think there are some pockets where airports are seeing growth, but this is not the industry norm. I would say the norm is probably we're at about 80 to 90% of 2019 pre-pandemic travel nationwide. So, and then our revenues, our top 10 revenues, the couple things that are probably worth noting. All of our concession revenues continue to trend up as passenger traffic continues to increase. Landings and freight are up, and that's really a timing issue from when the payments are received, and employee parking position permits, rather, that's also a timing item. On expenses, we do have a couple of expenses on the IT side. That the indirect cost reimbursement, that's because we added software and some other IT expenses into that account. The parking management has increased again because parking has increased, and so those are the fees that we charge. Fleet management, that's due to some repairs on some ARF equipment. Electrical and plumbing, that's because we added and I'm going to read it here, a vestibule fire smoke damper that we replaced in the last fiscal year. And then also we resealed some skylights. And then finally, engineering services, it was just new studies being performed for the North Cargo apron. So. You may recall every quarter we look at how Boise Airport compares to our peers. This shows our traffic capacity trends. You can see that in 2021, load factor and passengers is trending back up, but we are still not to where we were in 2019. But again, this was the year ended December of 21. These are, they're lagging because they follow DOT submissions based on airline data. These are our top origin and destination markets. Not a lot changes here, but it's, I think, always nice to look at what the top origin destination markets are. And you can see that we do have nonstop service to most of these destinations, not all of them, but most. And then also we like to look at the market share because that shows what the competitive environment in our market looks like. And it is very competitive. You can see Alaska has 27%, followed very closely by Southwest 24% and Delta at 19%. United has lost a couple of shares. They used to be closer to 18%. And Americans actually gained market share at 10%. And then the others, Allegiant and JetBlue, and then other.
Madam Chair, Rebecca, one quick question.
Yes.
How do we measure market share? Is it enplanements or
Yes,
dollars
it's
or
by
what?
enplanements.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. It would be a little bit different maybe if we measured it by operations, but we measure the market share by the number of passengers that they carry.
Got it. Thank you.
And then you can see our forward-looking schedule. In the past, when we've looked at this, we've seen some pretty dramatic increases in the out months. And I think we're still seeing that in September and October. You'll see Can you see that last here? Let me see if I can move this.
Be able to do under view options side by side.
I think you can see it this way. You can see in September and October, we're showing currently some substantial increases in capacity. I suspect that probably will not come to fruition. I think everyone's probably followed in the news all of the pilot shortages, crew shortages that's impacting traffic. We have seen some of that here in Boise, but not as much as they've seen other places. But I do expect as these dates get closer, airlines will reduce their schedules. If not, I'm not sure where we're going to put all of the airplanes or all of the passengers or all of the vehicles, but that's my prediction. And you can see that through the summer, seats remain about the same. And then our seats per capita, you know, this is a good comparison of how we compare to other communities. You can see, again, we compare very favorably to our peers. Charleston, Spokane, and Reno all have more than we do. They're all, well, Charleston is generally, maybe not during the pandemic, but generally would be a significantly larger market than Boise, and also a very strong tourism market. Spokane, we've always talked about, they've always had lots of seats going back and forth primarily to Seattle. So they have more seats, but they don't have as many nonstop destinations. And then Reno is also very comparable to Boise in terms of community. And this chart here shows the number of passengers and also the average airfare. You can see that we're very close to Reno. We're third behind Reno and Charleston in terms of passengers, but we tied for the lowest domestic fare compared to this market group. And then this is the year-over-year comparisons. And we had the 5th highest percentage seats, increase in seats, and also in passengers. There were several airports that had stronger recoveries, but I would just note that we also had a very strong recovery in 2020. We never dipped as far. And so I think that this probably reflects that as well. Even though we did have a strong recovery, I think we didn't dip as far, so we didn't have as far to come back, if that makes sense. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Are there any questions or? Yes.
Excuse me. On the sustainability grant, you said that the aircraft would go to the west end of the runway and then would have an alternate type of power. How does that work?
We actually are installing power units there. I would say probably the best comparison or maybe analogy to use would be, think about like if you go to an RV park and you park your RV and you plug into electrical there so you don't have to leave your vehicle running. It's basically the same sort of thing. So we are installing a ground power unit there where the aircraft park. So the aircraft that are parked there while they're loading, unloading, they're not running on,
Okay.
they're not running on the aircraft engine, they're running on electrical.
I thought you were talking about when they taxied out, that somehow they
Oh, no,
use alternate power.
that
as they're
would
waiting.
be impressive.
Yeah, but.
We're not quite there yet,
People
Trent.
running around with ports.
We're not quite there yet.
All right.
Are there any other questions?
Just a quick one.
Yes.
What's the estimated completion date of the public parking garage?
We are looking at July or August of 23.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, well, let's proceed then into commissioners' comments. Thank you, Rebecca, for a thorough report. I'm going to start on my right. Commissioner
I have nothing.
Bosinger.
No, it's nice to see everyone's face. It's I appreciate seeing the smiles. It's really hard to smile with your eyes. I've been trying for 2 years, but it's just nice to see the smiles. So
True that. Yeah. Mayor,
It's good to be here. Just, I wanted to apologize to Rebecca because I'm sure it was my 11-year-old granddaughter that was praying for snow. And so I just want to apologize for that. No, it's good. I am actually going to fly. I haven't done that for a long time. My daughter and I are going to New York. Her choir has been invited to sing at Carnegie Hall. And so on the 26th of this month, I will be using the airport again, which I haven't been able to do for long. Look forward to that.
thank you, Mayor. Mr. Walker.
I have nothing to add today.
All right, very good. Russ.
Okay. Just pleased to be here and see everyone in person. I think this is a real treat. Look forward to doing it again.
Nice to not have to have a mask on.
Yes, indeed. Moving on to our Zoom participants, General Sailor, any comments?
Well, good morning. I wish I was there in person with you, but I'll be flying home later today to Boise to try to up that passenger count one more seat. Everybody has a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Padgett
No, thank you.
and Ms. Willetts.
No, just thank you. Great update. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So I have initiated my travel personally. My husband and I went to Maui 2 weeks ago on Alaska. We had a very great trip over. However, on our return, we intersected in Seattle with Mr. Biden's visit, which shut down the Seattle airport for 3.5 hours, all flights, because he was at a fundraising dinner and he was delayed getting back to Air Force One. So we sat on the ground in Maui for 3.5 hours with everything delayed back. So that was interesting. Not a lot of happy people, I have to say. But other than that, it was great. And on the 16th, I am traveling to Barcelona to attend an Entrepreneur Women's Summit, which should be fabulous. I always look forward to that. The last one we had in person was in 2018. So looking forward to doing this opportunity one more time with great speakers. That is all from me. Should we move on? I know we have a guest presentation today.
We do. And if you're ready, I would be happy to introduce Steve Baldwin. Oh,
We have a comment in the chat.
let me look at the comment in the chat.
Before we move on.
And the comment is, maybe I missed it, but I'd like some clarity on the West End GPUs that are being installed. Are those to service UPS? I'm confused because surely UPS uses their own GPUs as they idle. And the answer to that question is yes, they are going to service UPS. And I do not believe that they are currently using GPUs. They do have ground power units, but they're not in lieu of air engine idling. So I think it's a different type of equipment.
Madam Chair, as a follow-up question to that, will the cargo bay on the southeast side have the same type?
We are not installing those yet, but it is something that we certainly could look at. We have installed these ground power units at each of the jet bridge gates already, and also at FedEx. So I do expect that at some point in the future, we would use grant funding to fund that type of equipment on the South Cargo, but it's not part of the initial plan. All right, well, for those of you who've been on the commission or who were with us back in 2019, you will remember that we were looking at some strategic planning, and we recognized that we had a pretty substantial workload ahead of us. And we did some strategic planning with our executive management team. And one of the things that came out of that is that we really needed to look at our staffing levels. And we did, and we implemented a number of the recommendations that came forward from that. Fast forward 2 years, despite the pandemic, we are now in the process of actually implementing that capital development plan. We are seeing passenger travel return. And we also, in part, at least because of the pandemic, we transitioned to the medium hub category of airports, which brings forward a whole new set of requirements and opportunities. And so we thought it would be worthwhile to take a look at the staffing plan again, update it, and we had a couple of specific questions about staffing and our organizational structure that we wanted answered. And so we asked Steve Baldwin with Steve Baldwin and Associates to update the assessment, and he's here to give us a presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good morning, commissioners.
Good morning.
So first of all, I'd like to thank you all for having me back in to present to you today. As Rebecca said, we started working with your management team on the strategic planning process, laying out the capital program. And one of the things that was very apparent during those sessions was the organization really wasn't stood up to a point where it was prepared to take on the capital program. We went back and did an organizational assessment. It's actually one of the city's demonstration programs to the other city departments on how to go through those processes. I remember the mayor at the time was very proud of that. But what that demonstrated was that there was room for improvement in the organization, and you need to add certain key positions when you went through this capital planning phase. The pandemic came, your hub status changed by FAA designation from small to medium, which brings on a new set of requirements. Your growth level in Boise is phenomenal as a community and as an airport. All that happening 2022, let's take another look at the organization and where that's heading. So today I'm going to do a little bit of a very quick refresher. Next slide, please. Of the 2019 work, and I'll roll right into where we are in 2022. Somebody advance the slide. Somebody's doing my slides?
That's me.
Oh, I thought you were texting and sliding.
I am busted, multitasking.
So next slide, please. If you'll recall, the phenomenal growth rate of 58%. And then when you compare, as Rebecca pointed out in her report, March 22 over March 20, you've already had 7 to 8% increase in your March numbers alone. April numbers are not out. So, air travel throughout the country is starting to come back, and it's coming back very strong. And it's at a time when the airlines are struggling because they haven't been able to ramp up their personnel services either, particularly their pilots. There's a big pilot shortage. But in actuality, that number is actually larger than 58% if you take the COVID out of the formula. So it's very fast. And at the same time, I think your community is growing at 7 or 8% per year as well. So very robust market here in Boise. Next slide. That was in the backdrop of having to take on a substantial $200 million plus capital improvement program. And obviously, you're all witness to the ongoing problems of limited parking or lack of parking and bottlenecks elsewhere in the facility. Next slide. One of the things that was pointed out too, and that you should be aware of the hub status change, I just want to digress for a moment. Going from a small hub to a medium hub designation, it adds a new set of regulatory requirements for the airport. But now you're in a somewhat elite status of airports throughout the country. You're one of 36 small hub airports in the country. Before you were one of 72 small hubs, one of 36 medium hubs. And the complexity of a medium hub airport as it grows will be increasing. The passenger services and expectations will continue to increase, and particularly as you pull off your capital program. Passengers coming into the new facilities are going to have very high expectations with regard to customer service, cleanliness, custodial systems, and integration. So something to be aware of. So these were some of your old stats. Boise was number 3 in terms of employments when we did our last work among your peer airports. But you had very low end salaries. Your benefits were on par with other airports, and you had a very low cost per employment. The cost per employment index is used throughout the industry. It's always something an airport's very proud to have a low cost per employment. The airlines like that, right? Because they end up paying a large part of your bills. But if your cost per employment is too low, it's an indication that you're not reinvesting in your organization or your facilities as you need to keep up with growth. And we see Boise's CP as being pretty low. So we made these recommendations in the 2019 study, and to your good credit, almost all, but well, in fact, all but one have been largely accomplished. Now, these things don't just go away. They have to be maintained at these levels. But you brought on additional airfield engineers, business development staff, credentialing supervisors, project managers, et cetera. The one recommendation we had was bringing your corporate counsel in-house, having a position here at the airport that is your dedicated legal attorney for aviation matters. And we would still stand behind that recommendation if you want to work towards that end. If you think about the size of this campus and you think about it as if it were a company, what company of this size would not have corporate counsel in-house, right? So it's pretty important, and the continuity of what that particular individual learns in the aviation sector and carries forward is very important. So in 2022, things didn't change from 19 in terms of growth, right? You're still under very strong growth, regional growth and aviation growth, and you have your upgrade program now well underway. So the organizational requirements are going to change from how do you ramp up from planning, design, engineering, construction, inspection, and implementation of new facilities to now operation and management of those facilities. So the bathrooms you didn't have before, you'll have in the future. The parking lots you didn't have before, you'll have in the future. They go from design and construction to now operations and management. Your organization has to be able to be fluid enough to shift with that. We wanted to validate the growth, the regulatory requirements, recognize the Boise upgrade, and meeting community expectations as they will be high as you come off this program. Excellent. We did a similar exercise in 22 as we did in 2019, which was select peer airports as a data set for comparative purposes. We selected different airports this time. We did it with airport management. We go through a demographic model so that we basically avoid bringing bias into the selection of the peer group. So these are airports that are very similar to Boise, both in size, demographic, and operating characteristics. Snow belt airports have snow removal teams, et cetera. And so we then had key findings we'll go through and then followed by recommendations. So growth is up from 2012 by 1.5 million additional passengers per year coming through your facility. That is huge. 2.6 to 4.1 million. We're seeing post-pandemic travel returning very strong, as Rebecca said, maybe 85 to 90% nationwide pre-pandemic. But here at Boise, you're already exceeding pre-pandemic levels. So it just is a testimonial to how strong the market is. FAA forecasts, terminal area forecasts for each airport in the country, they extend their forecasts out 20 years. And over the next 20 years plus, FAA is seeing at least a 3% or so increase in activity here at Boise. Now that's an economic model that they use and not an actual operational model. So from year to year, it could be greater. And FAA tends also to take an extremely conservative approach in their forecasting methodology. One of the things is that while you've made great strides in your organizational design and in the levels of staffing within your organization, what you have today is not sufficient for where you'll be in the next 5 years. In fact, it's already deficient in some areas, and through the next 5 years, you're going to have to ramp up. So these are the airports that we collected data from for the comparable analysis. I know that's a little bit hard to read, so I'm going to break out a few columns here. I didn't break them all out, but I just took a few as some examples of where Boise lies. Excellent. So we used Indianapolis, Milwaukee, Boise as a center of the data. This is by employment. Reno, Oklahoma, and Spokane. One thing about the data throughout this presentation regarding Spokane, it is the one airport in this data set that made some substantial staffing reductions during the COVID period, where other airports had a tendency to hang on to their workforce. Next
Steve,
slide.
can I just add one thing as well about Spokane? Spokane and Reno, both, and Oklahoma City, all used to be larger than Boise. So, I mean, when we think about our data set and how it's changed, you know, as we've grown, we've exceeded some of these other peer airports.
So here we looked at an index that compares how many staff you have per employment. Okay. And, oh, I'm sorry, no, let me back up. This is your full-time equivalent staffing. So while Boise was in the middle of the data set, you can see Boise's at 133. The middle of the data set is pretty much around 250 on average, okay? So you have about 133 staff. Milwaukee's more in the center. Indianapolis is on the high side. And we would argue that Indianapolis is on the high side. But we'd also argue that Boise is significantly lower than what's trending nationally. Here is the index of employees per employment. So you're squeezing many more employments out of your organization per employee than the other airports, but it also would be indicative of the stress that you're placing onto the organization. Not that you're placing on the organization, but the organization is withstanding. And then here is just a department comparison of marketing and business development. You can see it's not as invested in as in the other airports. And go ahead, Rebecca, I know you like to advance those. Thank you. Finance and accounting. And so this is not to say that you need to ramp up equivalently to the other airports, but when your managers are saying they need staff or they need some relief, you can always look back at this and use it as sort of a reference as to whether or not this is an area that we should look further into. So our forecast for increasing the organizational staffing level is about 70 full-time equivalents over the next 5 years. About half of those FTEs need to come on board in the next 2 hiring cycles. So 2022, 23, and then the remainder half over the next 3-year period. When we looked at departments and in our exercise, we re-interviewed many of the department heads, if not all the sub-department heads within your organization. There is a common theme of a little bit of stress and anxiety that the resources are just spread too thin and everybody's scrambling. Some employees are actually concerned about taking their earned leave time or taking a vacation because things will fall through the cracks while they're away. They just don't have anybody to back them up. So next, non-competitive salary structure. One of the things that is glaring with regard to Boise is your salary structure is not up to par with the industry. Particularly for your airport specialty positions, those positions where people go seek their education in aviation management. They understand all the complexities of managing an airport. They're trained for that. Those are very hard positions to recruit, and there's a shortage of them nationally. Recruiters and recruitment right now are very flush with work trying to find people, and there are very limited people to find. But when it comes to like looking at your organization, the salaries just aren't comparative with what's going on nationally. So we'd encourage a relook at that.
Is that also showing up in turnover in those key
Well,
positions?
if you go back, Rebecca, please, we do believe that you're having difficulty with recruitment and retention.
Yeah.
And, recruiters will look for opportunities. They're going to look for where they can find people that are looking for improvement, right? So it could be a situation that could grow worse. Obviously, the airport's becoming more important to the region as a whole. The governance model that you have as a city-owned and operated airport is not uncommon, but it's becoming less and less common at this size airport. medium hub airports complexity is constantly increasing. And so the idea that you can look at your governance model and see where you can make improvements in efficiency, instead of going for exceptions all the time because you're an airport, you're not a regular city department, would help the management team here to guide this airport a little more with more agility, a little more speed, and a little more business acumen, if you will. So recommendations. So here's our prediction on staffing demands, as I mentioned, about 25 and 23, additional 15 or so in 24. And then over the next few years, as your new facilities come on board, you're really going to have to look at things like maintenance, janitorial, housekeeping, operations, et cetera. Yes, sir.
Yes.
How do these break out between administrative? Sounds what we're talking
Right
about,
there.
more administrative versus operational.
Here's where, as a first cut, is a sub-department assignment of these positions that, we see. These are not cast in stone. They're not, it's something that Rebecca and her team will have to take forward and actually refine and make some, I'm sure she'll make some adjustments to these, but these are the areas that we see you need to be hiring in right now.
If I can
Yep.
add to that. So a lot of times when you look at, for example, the operations specialist 3, we have 3 shifts. So really you're adding 1 person per shift because we're 24/7. So it sounds like a lot. Same thing with custodial. If we add 6 custodians, we're adding 2 people per shift. So I would just keep that in mind as we're looking at these numbers. They seem maybe a little bit shocking. I know I looked at that and I went, wait a minute, what? But then as you start to really dive into it.
It's an excellent point, because that's one thing you have to remember. The airport's open 24/7, right? Now, when we talked earlier about Spokane's data being a little bit skewed because of the actions they took during COVID, they also closed their doors from midnight to 4 a.m. So they don't have that shift requirement. Smaller airport, less demand during that period. It's not a very good business model to begin with, to literally stop an operation and then just 4 hours later restart it. It's difficult, but that's it. Their staffing levels are still higher, but they're doing much less, and so
Just reading that chart, it's hard to break out. How would you break out the administrative versus the operation?
I would, Commissioner, I would go through this right now and define these positions, which ones are administrative in nature, and then I could give you that number if you'd like. I could do
No,
that.
I'm just,
But that's,
Sure,
the
ballpark.
administrative is like, would fall in finance administration,
are
personnel.
we
HR.
light on administrative?
You have some weaknesses in the administrative side. You need additional HR help. Your county is probably pretty good. Probably maybe 1 position there. The rest of this is really very much focused around operations. So it's actual operation of the airport. Yeah.
One of the positions that's administrative that we're looking at is a data analyst. And we don't have anyone who's specifically dedicated to reviewing data. So for example, we have as a measurement cost per in-plane passenger, also revenue per in-plane passenger. We don't have anyone who's dissecting that and saying, what happens if we increase this rate? What happens if we do that? What are the opportunities for improving service and really analyzing different data sets? We just don't have that in our organization. It's always been done as an additional duty by whoever's managing that area. And so we don't really have someone who's dedicated to data, and that's worked in the past and it's been fine. But as we get bigger, if we don't do that, we're going to be missing opportunities to generate additional revenue or to save additional funding. Just because we're not, what gets measured gets done. And we really need to be measuring and focusing on some key metrics.
And just my final thought is that, as we go forward, as we move into the medium hub, things are going to be highly specialized, more so than at any point. So the administrative aspect of it as we change is really going to be critical when you say we're light on expertise and perhaps salaries. And as we're going to try to grow into the medium hub and be comfortable there.
Well, look, there's 35 other medium hubs and they need staff and resources too.
Yeah.
And they're gonna be looking around for where they get them. I'll be straight up with it. So you have to invest in that area of your organization or you're gonna see you'll be spending a lot more time managing it. So yes, absolutely. So we were asked to take a look at the organizational structure as a whole. And the question on the table was, should the organization be more aligned with airfield operations and landside operations, which many airports organize themselves that way, or should the departments have within them that differentiation between their air side and airfield operational responsibility? For this airport and working from the organizational structure you already have, our recommendation is to stay whereby your departments are organized by airfield and operations, but adding a duty manager, which we're going to talk about in a minute, as sort of the person that coalesces between those two entities in a real-time basis. So we were asked to specifically look at whether airport duty manager position was viable to solve some of the need to make ready on-demand decision-making for, those instances where you sort of need a command and control decision-making. Given the airport is open 24/7, and sometimes decisions just have to be made. And then to help coordinate the communication between landside and airside operational control. So we are recommending that the duty manager position be included in your organization. And that would report to your deputy director of operations.
If I can add,
Sure.
so as an example, obviously we operate 24/7 and, nights and weekends, and there isn't a central point of one person is in charge of everything during that time. So we have our operations center that coordinates operations, snow removal if there's an emergency. But if there's a power outage, that's done, we handle through facilities maintenance and it impacts operations. We don't have one person who's overseeing facilities, operations, parking, concessions. If we have a concession that closes early and isn't meeting their contractual obligations, we don't necessarily have someone who's here who's monitoring that. We have, for example, construction projects. A lot of times construction at the airport happens at night in that, after the checkpoint closes to, 3 a.m. We don't have someone managing and overseeing we have project managers here, but we don't have one central point of contact who's looking at all of those things. And so that's really what this is designed to do.
Salaries we talked about, so I won't reiterate that. The governance model we talked about briefly, but we would encourage you to take a look at the governance model to see where efficiencies can be gained. What is the SWOT on the governance model? Where are your weaknesses, your strengths, your threats, and then what can be gained by tweaking that model around? And that means looking at the role of the commission, what its powers and responsibilities are, looking at the procedures of the city and whether some of them should be, maybe they should be given a blanket waiver for airport operations instead of going each time to the city. We don't know the specifics of that without studying it, but I can tell you that generally this size airport continuing under such a growing city that has so many demands placed on its resources, we just don't want to see the airport fall behind and not be able to keep up with business, right? Because that's what's driving the airport. So and that's it.
Thank you. Questions? Yes.
This is very interesting information and recommendations that you presented. I personally could identify with everything you said. However, I think nobody sitting here is a decision maker in terms of implementing those recommendations. So I guess my question is, when are you going to make the same presentation to the city council?
I think Rebecca's got to be meeting with some of the mayor's people after this meeting. But, you know, you are advisory only in capacity, but I think the elected officials who place you here do have their ears open, their eyes open, and they garner your feedback, right? Like, so they want to hear from you about what you see and what you know.
And I would mention, we do have 2 members of the council who are joining us remotely. And there are liaisons from commission to council. So my hope is Councilmember Bajan and Councilmember Willits will take this back. And I suspect they probably have comments and questions as well.
Well, when we do take it back, we want to take back the commission's feedback as well. So to answer the question that was asked, what can we do about this? You can tell us what to do about it. That'd be really helpful to hear.
Yes.
Do you have airports that have been through similar transitions in their governance and models, and what went right, what they could have done better?
Yes, we've done, nationally, we're the leading firm in doing those assessments for the entire nation. So we have a lot of them that we've done. And it's not so easy to come to the table and say, oh, this went well, this didn't go well. Every single airport is unique. Every community that the airport is in is unique, and the culture. So what we can do is advise you as to what we see here, put a host of suggestions on the table, and then discuss and dialogue about them. Some of them will be very valid, some of them may not be that valid for here. But it is an exercise that you ought to be going through and figuring some things out.
Yes.
Question, and this comes from my last 32 years of working with budgets at the city level. You know,
You're still here.
Yeah, the 2 sides of it, obviously, the need is one certainly an important issue. The second side is funding and prioritizing and figuring out which one of those should happen first, and then figuring out not only on a plan for implementing, but also the budget side of it. I'm guessing the council members, that's at the top of their list right now, of listening to this presentation and saying, okay, what are the dollars? How do we fund those positions? So I'm assuming, I guess maybe I should assume, or maybe not, but along with these recommendations, you have been working with staff to come up with, okay, what is the increase in wages that is appropriate? What is the total cost of that?
I'm sure.
Is prioritized. What is the cost of that?
So Rebecca's team is well armed to understand what adding FTEs to the organization is going to cost the organization. What I'll say is you're bringing on a number of increased revenue producing assets to your airport, like your new garage. And when you looked at your finance numbers earlier during Rebecca's report, parking is your biggest revenue generator there is. But keep in mind, this is an enterprise fund. So anything that you do here, as long as it's logical, it's within reason, it meets business and customer service expectations, is paid for by the user fees and the airlines, right? So it doesn't fall on the city taxpayers at all. There's no taxpayer involvement at the airport. So it will, that discussion and that dialogue will find a balance of what the airport budget can sustain, what's reasonable, where those priorities are.
So I apologize. I do realize that. I mean, enterprise fund has to pay for its own cost, but again, what generates those fees is, I guess, the question that I,
So
how does
if I
that
can
balance?
take a stab at that. Couple things. One, as Steve mentioned, our cost per in-plane passenger is exceptionally low. It's about half of what our peers are. And as part of the airline use and lease agreements that we're looking at, that we've talked about before, some of those rates will be adjusted. And we're not saying that they have to go up to a certain level, but we do need to invest in the airport, and that includes in these staff positions as well as in the infrastructure. So that's one piece to that. The other piece to this, I would say, and some of the positions will actually help generate revenue and help us accomplish the projects better, or perhaps maintain costs. Again, back to that data analyst, I think there's opportunities to generate additional revenue and perhaps reduce costs in other areas. One of the recommendations, for example, was for properties and contracts administrator, as we go through and we do things like non-aeronautical property development, there's going to be more leases. We have more leases that are coming on board. You know, those will generate additional revenue. So I think we do have opportunities, one, to pay for it through increased revenue, revenues.
Thank you.
Yeah, my comment feedback, because I'm the one who asked that we redo this, because I was very concerned about the stress in the organization, the recruitment away of our key talent from this organization, and the need to really plan for the next 5 years with the medium hub and the anticipated continuing to get back on a scale of exceeding the conservative comprehensive plan projections, because we've been beating those significantly despite a sort of short time out. Having gone through other organizations who are in this kind of growth pattern, it's a unique balance to be sure that we look at the ranges of those key industry positions where we're competing nationally and be sure that we can be competitive. Now, it doesn't mean we have to be at the very top of the range, but we can't be living in the medium to lower part of the range, or we're just going to be the airport that brings people on, develops them, and then they go somewhere else. And that is devastating to an organization, and we've been living through a bit of that. So for my feedback to the council, I would ask that we really look at this as sort of a separate organization that has unique demands and does compete nationally for aviation specific positions.
We are struggling, particularly in the operations area, I think, and some other ones. And we have made, I think, great strides in this area. And as we've made great strides, I think the industry has also evolved. And we are definitely in a place, as Steve alluded to, of a worker shortage and a skilled worker shortage. So I think, you know, that is definitely impacting us, along with the fact that cost of living here has increased dramatically. That's making it challenging to recruit people from other places.
We have made some very good strides in salary. The city has worked hard to make across the board strides in salary. The city should be proud of that accomplishment. But it's just not keeping up with our market, not keeping up in the aviation market, and the rate of growth and inflation, right? I mean, as soon as you finish with dealing with the city structure as a whole, you've got inflation at 7-8%. It's very, very, very difficult to now go back and redo that around those statistics. But when you're job shopping or moving around, then you need to be able to redo that. You know, it's a fact.
Yeah.
When you're in your analysis of governance in this commission in particular, there's some questions as far as you're talking about growth and participation. There hasn't been any focus on this commission in relation to what it can do and what could be expected of it. Since we're advisory, we're on a need to know basis on a lot of things. We don't know things until they've happened. And that's fine. I mean, again, we're advisory. So as far as governance going forward, having everything go to the city on a continual basis, number one, it chews up a lot of city council time and administrative time when more could be pushed back towards the commission. And that has to be developed. It just doesn't happen organically. So,
On that subject, right? If you read the ordinance, reading this commission, it's, you have to really imagine that the word advisory is there. If you read, I suggest everybody back and read the ordinance that created this commission, and it really puts you in charge of a lot of things at the airport level. And
How old is your ordinance?
Pardon?
How old is that ordinance?
I've been,
4 years. How many?
I imagine 20 years.
Well, and I think we probably should look at it. It's not something that's on my regular reading list. I will be the first to admit. You know, and it was changed, but I think that's something that I think it has to go to council. It has to be considered by the mayor. And I don't think that Steve's recommending a wholesale change, but you know, what are the things that we can do differently and better, because as we get more complex, you know, you start to see some things that are handled for us by the city come in-house, or, you know, we're not being as innovative maybe as we could. And I'll pick on IT a little bit, not because our IT isn't amazing, because I think our IT does great with what they have, but they're focused on city. And we're trying to think about airport specific IT applications that maybe help us manage jet bridges and gates. That's incredibly important. Our public address system, our flight information display system, and some of those things they help us with, but it's really a unique specialty. So that's just one example. Steve brought up legal.
Yes.
There's just the complexity of the legal environment at the airport. And we've had, I think, 4 attorneys now in the 10 years that I've been here. So I'm hoping Kelly stays a little bit longer than maybe some of our other attorneys have. But those are real issues where, you know, we don't have the continuity. And then, you know, to the staffing piece, I do think we have always taken the approach that we're going to be minimally staffed. We're going to be lean. And it works until it doesn't work. And the example is, you know, we have right now, as you know, we lost one of our key employees. And the situation was workable when we were at 100%. And then when someone leaves us for another position, we're in a crunch. And then if someone else leaves unexpectedly, we're really behind the power curve. So I guess the point is our strategy can't be that everything's going to be perfect all of the time. We have to have a little contingency in there.
Yeah, one other observation around the commission. My observation is the city made a move to make all the commissions the same. Excuse me. The commissions, the city made a decision to make all commissions the same in terms of term, in terms of responsibilities. And that was admirable, but it did not recognize the unique demands of the airport. And, you know, we used to have 5-year terms. Now we have 3-year terms. We, you know, used to have more opportunity, I think, to influence and less to just rubber stamp or, you know, raise a question. So I do think it's a legitimate issue that should be considered over this next 5-year period. And it will also influence the criteria for who you recruit to be on the commission.
Good point. And I also think that, you know, if there's one area that you learn about the airport is getting involved at the budgetary stage and having some of the preliminary work done by the commission on the budget before it goes to council. Like, you know, typically the department head takes the budget, works the budget, presents it to the council, and that's fine. But also there, you know, in other organizations like planning and zoning, they'll work on the actual, I don't know about Boise City, but they'll look at the staffing levels because they're in the trenches there more, and they know what's happening at the development services level because they're hearing complaints. And so I think oftentimes, and that's a very sophisticated board, planning and zoning, and this could be a very sophisticated board at the same time, but you have to get into the weeds a little bit as far as the budget and staffing and things like that.
We will be bringing budget to this commission next month. It's not, we don't have it finalized yet internally. We're still working on a few things, but our intent is to bring budget to this commission prior to bringing it to council in June, just so you know. And Madam Chair, I don't know if you want to just check in with the folks that are online. We're having a robust discussion here. I just want to make sure we're not missing General Saylor or our other couple council members.
Sure, it's been an open ask for questions, so anybody can raise their hand.
So I can see if anyone's raised their hand. I do not see any questions.
Rebecca,
Nope.
for some reason, I'm not able to do that on my phone. This is Councilwoman Willits. I would just say this has been extremely enlightening. Thank you for the information. I know that Councilmember Bagans on the phone, as well as the mayor's chief of staff. So we're listening, we're gaining good information. And I think we all agree that the airport is not only critical to this area economically, but it's critical to what makes Boise a great place to live, and that's livability. So, I think you're going to get a lot of support from council on what needs to happen because we're growing. So just, and would just echo again, the quantifiable information is very, very helpful.
Let me chime in with one question for the commission, and maybe if you guys want to tackle it, we can talk about it at another meeting or later. But I would really love your feedback on how to, how you think best to balance this issue. So on the one hand, you can run a lean, mean, efficient operation that keeps the cost of employments low, makes us very attractive to airlines competitively, on the commercial sort of outward facing the rest of the countryside, a very appealing place for airlines to come and work and do business. But on the other hand, running that system lean means, not spending money, frankly, on things like employees and other things. And so as an enterprise fund, there's a balance that happens there. You can invest more at the cost potentially of increasing or decreasing our competitiveness in those outward facing ways, while maybe making us more competitive internally or better service to our community, et cetera, et cetera. But because of the enterprise fund nature of it, there is a balance. And what I hear from Rebecca is we've been balancing it by the skin of our teeth. And as a result, we're getting all these benefits, but additional strains may make that not work anymore. And, I'd just like to hear all your input on how to do that.
If I can lead off, because I think it's a very specific question about cost and cost benefit. When you think about the cost per in-plane passenger, what that really means is how much the airline is paying the airport for every passenger that goes through the airport. So right now we're at, I don't remember the exact number, it was like $3.60 some cents. Even if we increased it and doubled it, so we increased it 100%, we'd be at $7.40. So, or $7.20. So the point to that comment is just that we have not been balancing it, to be very candid. What's happened is our costs have remained somewhat fixed because we don't have a lot of changes in our cost. Our cost is the same to plow the runway, regardless of how many passengers come through. It costs the same to light the field, to heat the building. And we haven't really been investing in our infrastructure. And as the number of passengers has grown, we haven't added staff to really address that. And so we've been, in my opinion, we have been out of balance because we have grown so quickly, but we've not acted quickly. So between 2012 and 2019, we were very, very hesitant to add staff. We were very hesitant to invest in our infrastructure because we were going through that recession period and coming out of the recession. And so 2012 to 2019, we didn't change our staff at all. And we grew 58%. And so now as we look at specialties, we have been out of balance. The other piece to that I would add is I would expect that as passenger travel continues to increase, those costs will continue to be spread over more passengers. So even if we increase, for example, 100%, which no one here is recommending, those costs would double to, in theory, $7 and change per passenger today. But if we have 8% more passengers, then that cost is going to be spread over those. So maybe it'll end up being $5 or $6 per passenger. So, and that would actually keep us in line with what the industry average is. It wouldn't even take us to above average. It would take us to the industry average.
You don't want to be below average. Airport.
We don't want to be below average on our revenues, for sure. I hope that helped answer.
Yes, that's helpful. That's the kind of question that I'm thinking about personally, like what's the bigger picture, strategic plan for the well-being of the airport that also takes into account our desire to be attractive and competitive in the market for flights and airlines.
And I could go back, and I think I've shared it with council, and I can share it again, and I've shared it with commission when we went through those airline use and lease agreements. The comparison, I mean, Boise is so below our peers that it, I think, would have minimal impact on our competitive position.
Agree. Agree.
I mean, I'm 100% with you. We do want it to continue to be affordable. We want our rate structure to be predictable. We want airlines to come here. But I think they are going to come here.
Your CPE is really low.
Yeah.
And even the numbers, which Rebecca says nobody's asking for, are still low. We often get asked the question by clients, and we say, if your CPE is a single digit for the decimal, you're fine, which means if it's below $10, you're fine. You're at 350.
Right.
You're very, very lean.
I think Seattle's probably close to 30. To keep, I mean, I could give you all the spectrum. And I think Boston Logan, we were looking at it just because it was definitely an outlier. It was close to $70 per passenger. So I'm not saying that we should compare ourselves to those other airports, but when you look at Spokane, when you look at Tucson, when you look at Reno, all of those airports, their CPE is substantially higher than ours.
Yeah.
That's not the area you have to manage. It will go up. If it does go up, it will go up. But you have so much room there that you don't really need to be concerned with that as much as you do with making your investments. So to Patrick's question, you have a lot of room. So you're not going to fend anybody off or prospective airlines over your numbers. You're good.
And we shouldn't do it just for the sake of doing it, but we should do it in a way that's very intentional to make sure that we're achieving what our community needs. And I think, this goes back to our discussion on the airline use and lease agreements that we've had, where we may not always agree with the airlines, for example, because we might want to increase the cost so we can reinvest in a new concourse or new ticket counters. And they might say, well, we don't really want to do that because we don't want to bring in a new entrant. That's not in the interest of our community. Hypothetically, of course.
Yeah.
So I think we need to look at what's in the interest of Boise, the region, and do what's right to serve that at the airport. And the other things will fall in line. And we will be conservative. We will be fiscally responsible. But we've been a low cost. But I don't really think that we've done ourselves any justice, because we can't go back and collect the funds that we didn't collect over the last.
Well, and it's not sustainable, which means the risk is high. And the risk will continue to climb if we don't address it. And the good news is, from an economic standpoint, we've got room with our airlines because the demand's going to continue to grow and they're going to need to be here. So it's the right time to do this, which is great.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
from my perspective, I think this is one of the better discussions we've had on the subject in a long time. I also want to make it known that I have great confidence in the administration, and I thank them for persevering with less than the resources they should have. So I think it's been a good discussion. I hope we continue. And thank you.
Confident we will.
My pleasure.
Wish you well in your
Thank you.
next presentation, the discussion. There may be somebody else in the chat, and just, would you check Rebecca, be sure we're not missing?
I don't see anything.
Okay.
Madam Chair, could I make just one
Yes.
comment? Rebecca, and again, thank you very much for what you and your staff do. The other cost that is not measurable is if you're not able to keep up with the growth, if you're not able to provide the services, if you're not able to have an efficient running airport, then whether it's airlines or customers start growing impatient with inefficiencies, or when something does go wrong, we're not able to deal with it and handle it right. So there's a cost by being too lean, just as much, I think, in providing service as there is being so expensive that nobody wants to come here, right? So I think balance, I think, is what Councilmember Bajent said. What is that balance? I'm confident that you will find that, because there is a cost to not doing what we need to do to make sure that we're an airport that is desirable from all aspects, not just cost.
Thank you. All right, wonderful. Do we have any questions from the public? And if so, just a reminder that any discussion does not exceed 5 minutes per issue unless the chair extends it. So anything, any comments from the public? Anybody want to step up? Seeing none, it is the time to ask for a motion to adjourn.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I move we adjourn.
and a second?
Sure. Second.
Thank you. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay? We are adjourned.